Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Do It Differently webinar series with host Tamar Krebs. My name is Caroline. I work at Group Home. I just wanted to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also wanted to thank you all for being here and ask you to explore, connect and share with us today. So feel free to pop in your camera, or if you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, just feel free to pop them in the chat at the bottom of your screen. So in today's webinar, we're going to be discussing family dynamics and understanding the family story when choosing care. So I would like to introduce you to Tamar, the founder of Group Homes Australia. Thanks, Tamar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see you all, and thanks for those who have turned on their screen, because it's nice to see faces. Great to be spending the next half an hour together. So if you want to pop on your screens, and feel free to use the chat, like Caroline said. Today we're going to be discussing, can we have it all together? And it's really about care partners, people who are in the network of caring for people living with beyond a diagnosis of dementia, and understanding the family story and how that impacts when we choose care. And so in our last webinar, we discussed, if you've met one person living with dementia, you've met one person living with dementia. Every single person is different. And the metaphor that we give is the succulent. You know, there are tens of thousands of different types of succulents in the world. Some of them need a lot of sunshine. Some of them need a lot of water. Different succulents need different types of soil to be nurtured. And it's very much like people living with dementia, that every single person that you meet, they might all have Alzheimer's, but they all have a different life story, and they all have different life circumstances. If they might have different types of diagnosis, and their presentation is different. And so we should never approach someone with the same rule of thumb of, well, this is how I treat people living with dementia. Especially as professionals, we have the risk of becoming desensitized because this is what I always do, or this is how it's always done. And we have the risk of being desensitized because we think that people with dementia are similar. And so I want you to keep in mind, if you've met one person living with dementia, you've met one person living with dementia that has a different life story, has different life circumstances, and who they are today is years and years of who they were in their past. And so that's really different. And so when we look at the family dynamic of when we may not have it all together, but together we have it all. You know, some people are really lucky to have a really big support network. And that might be a care partner, that might be children, that might be sometimes parents. In the case of younger onset dementia, you might have people that their parents are actually the ones who are taking care of them. But often we find that if there is a support network, the support network needs a lot of support nonetheless. And there are those that don't have a support network, that they may not have a partner. They may be estranged from their children. They may not have had children. They might have a public trustee or public guardian that has been appointed, or trusted friends. And so every single person that you're interacting with when you're coming into care for someone with dementia, you're looking at their support network, but then you're looking also at the extended support network and who these people are. But in terms of when we look at how the support network cares for people, for the person living with dementia, we need to be able to step into their brain as well. You know, in the previous webinars, we discussed stepping into the person living with dementia's brain and their changing brain. And we spoke about the changes that happen. But when you meet a family, you're essentially meeting a family often that has been in crisis for a fair amount of time. They've been diagnosed, and sometimes they could have been diagnosed a couple of years prior. So sometimes by the time they come to care, they've been living with the diagnosis 5, 10, 15 years, and you're meeting them in the last maybe 3 years of their life. And so they've been surviving. They've been in survival mode. And so often your experience when you interact with them is going to be a little bit different than just meeting someone who's either aging or someone who has a different type of diagnosis. What we know when a family is dealing with or living with someone with dementia, they have heightened anxiety, they're heightened grief, They're either in fight, flight, or fright. They're scared of what the future holds. They either want to run away and not deal with it. They either want to be quite the advocate and defend and fight for the person's right, or they're just really, really scared. I don't want my mother to deteriorate. I don't want my father to deteriorate. I don't want my partner to have to move into care. And they have a lot of preconceived ideas of what they do want and what they don't want. And as support coordinators or care partners or people from the industry, we can't have a blanket rule of this is how we do things. Because like we said in the beginning, if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. And every time you meet someone new, you're meeting a whole new person with a whole new story, with a whole new set of circumstances. And so when we look at an understanding, when we interact with the family, we're very much interacting with a family that has different needs, different wants, different levels of intensity and anxiety, and they're in different parts of their journey. You might meet someone early on where they're just starting to deal with the diagnosis and they're not quite sure what it means to live with dementia. You might be meeting a family sort of, 5 to 10 years in where they're exhausted. They have care fatigue. They're not sleeping. They're struggling. The friends have fallen away. They're now dealing with a much smaller network and they're scared. So it really depends when you meet these people along their journey is how you're going to interact and how you are going to adapt your style, your skill, your brain to interact with them. There are a lot of decisions that have to be made along the way. And often what happens is we tend to give a lot of information. As industry providers, we want to give as much information because we think that that's helpful. But often what happens is it depends what information you give at what time. Information and knowledge is power. The more we know, the more we're empowered to make decisions. But often it depends how much information you give at what point of the person's journey. Now, there's an interesting, I guess, a dilemma or an interesting gap, void that we have in the industry. If you're going to get diagnosed with dementia, I'd encourage you to get diagnosed with a different disease. And what I mean by that is, if you get diagnosed with, for example, cancer, there's so much resources out there for someone who has a diagnosis of cancer. If you get diagnosed with diabetes or hypertension, there's so many resources out there for someone who gets a diagnosis of diabetes and hypertension. If you get diagnosed with dementia, besides having the support of Dementia Australia, which is fantastic in terms of their education and their support that they provide in the way of education, you really don't have a lot of resources out there for someone living with dementia. You get handed a diagnosis and the psychogeriatrician or the geriatrician usually says, come back in 6 months. Now, what are you supposed to do between then and now? You don't get referred to an occupational therapist. You don't get referred to a physiotherapist. You don't get taught how to live with the diagnosis. You're just told to go sort out your affairs and sort of goodbye, good luck. So we need to move away from the fact that when someone gets diagnosed, they actually have an idea of how to live with the diagnosis. When someone gets diagnosed with hypertension or diabetes, they're taught how to live with a new way of living, a new way of eating, a new way of exercising, a new way of approaching their high blood pressure. But with dementia, what happens is we sort of leave them to struggle. And when they need care, that's when the people here on the call step in usually. And we usually find that each family has found something that's worked for them. They've found strategies that they might have been educated, or they found strategies that basically they tried this worked, and yet they tried that didn't work. So they did more of this and less of that. So essentially when you're coming into contact with families, we have to be able to identify who they are, what their life story is, and what are their needs. So often we talk about, when people living with dementia, about the resident's needs or the person living with dementia's needs. And in the last webinar, we spoke about the 6 human needs of the person living with a diagnosis. So today, I want to try and explore a little bit further, what are the needs of the family and what type of human needs does the family have? So the first human need, we talk about 6 human needs. The first human need is certainty. And I'll go through the six, and then we'll break it down in terms of what that means when you're interacting with a family. The six human needs are certainty, uncertainty, love and connection, significance, contribution, and growth. So when I talk about the human needs, I talk about these six human needs, and I'll go over them again because I see some of you are writing. Certainty, uncertainty, love and connection, significance, contribution, and growth. So when you're dealing with a family that has, and usually what happens is there's usually two out of those needs that are dominant needs. We all have all six of them, but usually we have two out of these six dominant needs that we're more of them, that we gravitate towards them more. So if you put certainty and uncertainty, there are people that really like predictability. They like certainty, they like schedules, they like routines. And there are people that are more uncertain, a lot more flexible. You know, I like surprises, I like change, I go with the flow. If you're dealing with a family that has a high need of certainty, and you're a person that's giving them, oh, we'll see how it goes, I'll connect with you in a couple of days, they're going to get quite anxious because you're not meeting their need. If you're dealing with a family that's really, they like uncertainty, they like change, they like fluidity, they have to think about things, and you're saying, okay, I'll put a plan together and I'll call you and we're going to meet up on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and this is how we're going to do it. They're going to be like, whoa, 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 what are you talking about? You know, I need to think about this. I need to process this. I need to go away and have a think. This isn't meeting my need. So really adapting you as the care provider or the support coordinator or the social worker or the carer, when you're dealing with the family, you have to say, hold on a second, are they someone that needs certainty, or are they a person that responds to uncertainty? Do they respond to routine and schedules and predictability? And we're talking about the family, the care partners, the network. We're not talking about the person with dementia, because we spoke about that last time. So then we talk about love and connection. Are they a person that needs to sort of know who you are and understand, you know, what I have found over 23 years of working in this industry, you're not just going to form a connection of, okay, I'll take care of the person living with dementia and then we'll move on. The family wants to form a connection with you. Some of the biggest relationships that are going to follow you over your career, the people that are going to be so grateful that you help them in the time of need. And so if someone has a high need of love and connection, or if you have a high need of love and connection, and you say, okay, so tell me about your family, and you know, what, you know, how many children are there? When did you get married? Where did you move from? What countries did you live in? Then there's going to be a connection. But if you're dealing with a family member that has no need for love and connection, this is a procedure for them. They're not going to share information. And then we label them cagey, or that they're not, you know, volunteering information, but they don't have that need for love and connection. And we have to be able to identify what is our need in terms of care providers and what is the need of the family. And that might be two separate needs. So certainty, uncertainty, love and contribution, they might not have needed for love and contribution, or they might have a really high need of love and contribution. And so you might take the time to say, hey, my name's Tamar. I'm the support coordinator. I've been in aged care and in dementia care for the last 24 years. This is why I got involved in it. So let me tell you a little bit about me, but only if that's important to someone. It'd be really silly if they're not interested in you. Like, why are you going on about yourself? I don't really care about you. This is about my loved one. So it's about you understanding what their need is. So then we move on to significance. And I'm sure we have, we've all dealt with that, the loudest person in the room, that they have the significance. They are the family's advocate. They know best. And sometimes they get labeled as challenging. Sometimes they're cantankerous. Sometimes they're so defensive. But you also have to understand a few things. If someone was the chairman of the board, and all of a sudden they want you to know that they're the chairman, and that their dad was the chairman, or their mom was a philanthropist, or each one, there's a high significance here. So you as the support person standing back and saying, ooh, they have significance. How am I going to interact with someone who has a high level of significance? I'm going to wait and listen to their stories and hear who they are, validate them. They need to qualify themselves. I remember when I was working in an organization and a person came up to me in my face and said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "No, but I'm sure you're going to tell me." There's such a high need of significance to tell me that they donated this and they did that, and it was important to them for the relationship. And instead of moving into judgment mode and saying, "Oh, they're a nightmare," you just understand that one of their 6 human needs is significance. And it will be much better for you as a provider of care and a provider of support to understand how you interact with someone that has a high need of significance, because your frustration will be minimized. Your frustration will be a lot less intense if you're not constantly trying to devalue them and you're playing the significance game. Like, no, I'm the support coordinator. No, I'm the one with significance. And it becomes a bit of a struggle. So let's go back to the human needs. So we did certainty and uncertainty. If someone has a high need of certainty, you might write things down. You might make sure that there's a schedule. You might say, okay, these are the plans. This is when I'm going to call. If someone has uncertainty needs, you're going to be a lot more fluid and flexible. If the person needs love and connection, you're going to look to connect with the family very different to then someone who doesn't have that need for love and connection, which really for this is about, I have a checklist here. This is what I want to get through. I don't really want to know about you. I want to know what you're going to give to me and how I'm going to use you as a service. And then we talked about significance, that if we come into contact with someone who's high significance, and they're at that point where they need to demonstrate that they are a person and they need to qualify themselves, don't go head to head with them. Rather, give them the opportunity to be able to, "Ooh, okay, I understand." You can identify what their needs are and you can interact with them a lot more appropriate. So the last 2 human needs that we're going to talk about is contribution. Some families need to feel like they're contributing, and they might contribute information, they might contribute ideas, and you need to be able to identify families that have a high need of contribution, and they might need a high need contribution from you. They might need you to solve the majority of the problems, or they might have a need for them to contribute. What I often found when I was working in residential aged care, families would say, "Oh, my partner deteriorated when they came into aged care." And sometimes it was because they were really deteriorating this whole time. And so when they came in and stepped back and saw the bigger picture, and so that need to contribute was, "You're not doing this right, you're not doing that right," and they give you a whole list of things that you're doing wrong. And instead of going head to head with them, what the better idea was to say, "Ooh, they have a high need of contribution. Great ideas. I'd love your input. How about if you could write it down for me, we can train the team, but using that contribution in your benefit." All of their human needs is about how do we connect and support a family that are supporting someone living with dementia, but understanding what their human needs are. And the last human need that we'll talk about today is growth. So growth primarily in human needs usually is about wanting to seek more information. There are some families that really want, and when you interact with them, they want you to educate them. "Tell me about dementia. Tell me about the industry. Tell me about my options. Tell me about, what's this going to look like in 2-3 years' time." And some families absolutely don't want to know it because, again, it takes them back to the fight, flight, and fright. And that you need to drip feed them the information at the time that they need it. But the care narrative, and I suppose this is where it takes us to, is that we have to be able to develop a different care narrative for each family. Because if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia, and that care narrative is going to be very, very different. They get a diagnosis from a doctor, but they don't get the information of how to care for someone with dementia. So creating a care narrative for someone who's caring for someone with dementia, and if you can include the person with dementia, 10 points. But often when they come to you, they're at the point, or often when they come to the care environment, the person living with dementia, often their world has become so small because the person caring for them is taken over. They can't drive, they can't cook, they can't clean, they can't do, and they give you a list of all things they can't. And I'm not really interested in the list of things they can't do. I want to know what they can do. And it's about exploring with the person living with dementia what they can do. But we need to be able to address the needs of the family, because if we don't connect, if we don't address them, it becomes a fight, because we're not connecting and we're not gelling. And essentially the person living with dementia is the one that that doesn't benefit if we're not connecting in the right way. So we spoke about the loudest person in the room, and that's the person that has high significant needs, is the advocate, is the ambassador, and we want to be able to relate to them. And it's really important to connect to that person, because we need to align with that person to be able to then look at different options. A little bit about us for the next 5 minutes, and then we'll finish. Well, we have 1 minute actually, and then we'll finish off. Group Homes Australia started in 2012. Where we tried to create a place where people could live with beyond the diagnosis of dementia, and they could have purpose and meaning in their day-to-day life. And what that means to different people is different things. And so our homes, we have 6 to 10 people living in the local community in a home. 6 to 10 people living in a home in the local community. Each resident has their own room. They get up in their own time. We don't have institutional routines. Our homes are beautiful. You walk into them and there's nothing institutional about them. They look, feel, and smell and function like a real home. Our staff are called homemakers because it's not just about the care. The care is a really small part of what happens in a day. They're not task focused. They don't wear uniforms. It's not about the showering and toileting and feeding. It's about celebrating life, and all those things need to get done. We focus on people living beyond a diagnosis, and we make sure that the residents, if they enjoy getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, or if they want to sleep until 10 o'clock, it's really about what brings them joy throughout the day. Residents get involved in everything that we do. So cooking, baking, gardening, shopping, go out and about. We had a resident that came from home who was a tradesperson, and he loved to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and be physical. And so you see here that he's painting the fence because that was meaningful to him. We also got the fence painted, which is great. But this was something that was purposeful to him, but it might not be purposeful to someone else. And so Group Homes Australia is all about celebrating the person and identifying what's meaningful to them. Now, just hopefully going away from today, you'll do something a little bit different when you interact with, whether it's your volunteers, whether it's the care network of people. You'll think a little bit different. You'll think about your needs as a provider and their needs in terms of their 6 human needs. And if you weren't part of our webinar last time we spoke about the brain changes and the human needs of a person living with dementia. If that's something that's meaningful to you, happy to send out the email to you with the recording of that webinar. Next month, we have a webinar, and it is going to be, instead of on the regular Wednesday, it's going to be on Thursday. And the topic of the webinar is Come Here, Go Away, Shut Up. The unmet needs of the introvert and extrovert when settling in.